Hey everybody, unfortunately we took this week off just due to a lot of personal stuff going on. Hope to be back next week, but in the meantime we wanted to share with you an older episode from 2021 where we talk about buying your first EV. We talk about my experience buying my first EV, talk about Brandon's experience, and get into some fun conversation in one of our earlier episodes. So hope you enjoy that episode and hope to see you next week.
Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 5 of season 2 of Living Electric. Today we are discussing what to look for in an electric vehicle.
Yeah, so we'll kind of start out with just sharing our experience of shopping for our cars, because I think that's what we're experts on, is shopping for our own vehicles. So we'll kind of walk through the sales process, I guess, of like what we looked for when we were first shopping, different options we considered, all that kind of stuff. And then kind of give you guys some advice if you are going to be shopping for an EV yourself, things to look for, things you might want to consider that either the salesperson or the car companies themselves might not be advertising, and things you might have to dig into a little bit more. So Brandon, you want to share your Bolt shopping experience or the ID4 too, because you've got two EVs now. So
yeah, which is crazy to think about, to be honest.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah. To be honest, I think I got lucky with the Bolt experience. At least I did cross shop, I think 3 or 4 different Bolts, and the 4th dealer experience was actually the best. The first 3 were very awkward. To be honest, when I went in there, they didn't want to like spend any time with me. So like I kind of just like left and found like a much better dealership to work with. But the thing is that the 3 other dealerships I went with, they didn't have an EV specialist. So they didn't have anybody who was like highly focused on electric vehicles.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But the dealership that I went to, that I bought the Bolt from, I actually worked directly with their EV specialist, and we were able to bounce ideas back and forth with each other to determine which Bolt would be right for me. And I kind of fell into a fully loaded Chevy Bolt LT. So that's like the base model with all the trims and safety features.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. But when it came to the Bolt, I always really enjoyed Chevy's electric vehicles. Like we had the Volt for a few years, and I just like adored that car.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I still probably would have kept that if I wasn't in a car accident a few years back.
Oh, I didn't even know that happened with your Volt.
Yeah.
You got in a car accident?
Yeah, I did. I was driving to work on a snowy day, and a teacher was rushing to get to work, and she didn't see that the cars in front of me were slowing down, and she slammed on her brakes and like slid right into the back of my car.
Oh no!
Yeah, destroyed the front of her car.
Did that total it?
Yeah, that was a fun day. It was like 12 inches of snow and everything.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, but the purchasing experience was pretty seamless, I would say, with where I bought the Bolt. The ID4 was the same way too. The only thing that I would say about the ID4 is that since it is a newer vehicle, the dealership had some experience with online training through Volkswagen, but we actually knew a lot more about the car than their sales associates did. Yeah. In fact,
funny.
Actually, 2 of them actually didn't even have a chance to drive the car when it was on the lot as a demo. So they had no experience behind the wheel with it. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I find that happening a lot when sorry to cut you off. I find that happening a lot. I find that happening a lot with especially EV buyers, is because it's such a niche product still, and it's still kind of in that like first adopter stage. Like most of the time the shoppers know more than the salesperson when they're going in to buy a car, because I mean the reality is a lot of these dealerships still sell a majority of gas vehicles, right? So I'm not surprised you had that same experience.
Like there was great like enthusiasm behind the product, which was really cool. Like I know a lot of Chevy dealerships, like my previous experience, they tend to like kind of like, oh, you want this gas car versus this electric car. Yeah. And the Volkswagen dealership we went to, I mean, like they have chargers installed, like all of them like are thoroughly like excited for like the electric future.
Oh, that's great.
And, yeah. So I mean, it was really, really refreshing to walk into a place like that.
Yeah. Did you notice a difference coming from your Bolt shopping experience to your Volkswagen shopping
yes.
experience?
Yeah. I guess the main reason is that this was like the fourth Volkswagen we had bought from this dealership. So like
okay.
they knew us, and they knew that we were the people that if you kind of messed up with, they would hear about it. Only because of all the issues we had with our TDI and dealing with all that garbage.
Yeah.
So
I gotcha.
Yeah. But I know that with you driving a Tesla, how was your experience?
Yeah, so I'll kind of back up and give you the whole process, because I feel like we covered this in like our first ever podcast episode, but I think it kind of bears some repeating. But
actually, Alex, I just realized I never even talked about my shopping process. I just
okay.
went on a little rant about
that's all good.
About the dealerships. Oh,
we can just
you keep.
I was going to say I can share it, and then we'll just go back to you to share that experience with like what you were looking for. Yeah, so just backing up a little bit, when I was graduating school, I had already bought another car. I used to drive a Scion FRS, is the car I bought like 3 months before I graduated school. Still like probably like my worst car purchase because it wasn't the car I wanted. I would have been much better off just buying like a cheap beater car to like get me back and forth to work and save up some more money before moving into an EV. Because I knew I've always wanted an electric vehicle. That's just where I really see the future of transportation going, and that's the kind of car I wanted to get into. Had been a long-term Tesla fan, so that was kind of at the top of my list, but I did shop around just because, like you, I wanted to get into an EV. I didn't really care which brand it was. I just wanted to get one. So I looked at, first off, my budget is what I kind of considered first. I'm like, all right, what can I afford on my salary, and the fact that I was living alone at that point too. So I had like a full rent payment by myself, which was tough. Jeez. So I knew I wouldn't be able to like buy a new car until I moved in with my now fiance, and we were able to split rent, which is awesome. So
makes it much easier.
Yeah, frees up the budget a little bit for fun stuff. So I really just spent my first year and a half really after I graduated just saving as much money as I could. Like really took it to heart that I was going to like save as much money as possible so that I could buy like a nice new car. So the Model 3 was at the top of my list. I was the cheapest Tesla available at that point. When I started shopping, the actual trim levels were completely different than what they are now. They used to have the standard range, the mid range, and the long range. And I think, did they have a dual motor at that point? I can't even remember, because I think that they had like a long range rear wheel drive. They had like 5 or 6 different trims. Like it was insane.
I think they did have the dual motor. I think
they did.
Okay. I believe so. Yeah.
Because I know they split like the long range rear wheel drive and long range dual motor, but then they also had a performance. Like there's a lot of different trims.
Glad they simplified it.
Yeah, so I was like, I knew it was going to be a little bit of a stretch, like financially for me. So luckily I just kind of waited it out. I didn't like jump into something I couldn't afford. And by that point, I was able to afford a dual motor long range. I knew I wanted a longer range car just because I think like getting over 300 miles of range just gives you so much more flexibility. And then the other part for me to consider was charging too. So back at my old job now, I was fortunate enough to have charging at work. So I was able to plug in there during the day, and then drive home and then just charge up a lot over the weekend. And then I could always stop at a supercharger if I really needed to top off at any point. But that was like a great setup and really, helped me not only financially, but like just kind of like personally make that jump, is that reliability of charging. Since I was in an apartment, I knew I had that to bank on. So, so I ended up landing with the Tesla. Some other vehicles I considered, were cheaper ones, honestly, because I knew I eventually wanted to get a Tesla. It was either buy a Tesla now or buy some other EV, live with it for a few years, and then buy a Tesla. So it was just either it wasn't a matter of like Tesla or not. It was just like when I wanted to get one. So I looked at like trying to think of what other cars I looked at. Like I looked at the Bolt because that was cheaper. I looked at the Honda Clarity, because I think that was like had a super cheap lease. Like it was like $200 a month or something like that for like a 3-year lease. I'm like, all right, I could afford that, but they only did that in California, so I couldn't do that in Ohio. And the car only had like a 90-mile range or something like that, so like it really wasn't going to be practical, I don't think, long term.
So, especially not in colder temperature.
Yeah, exactly. So I did shop around a little bit. I think just there's a few things that kind of brought me back to Tesla. I'm like a big tech nerd too, outside of electric vehicles. I like all the tech that's inside Teslas. I really like the design of them. And then the whole charging network as well, because I mean, even 2 years ago, like charging was a completely different landscape. Even the trips I take now, there's more superchargers than when I bought my car, and there's like multiple options for stopping on a road trip than I had before, versus like, oh, I have to stop here. So knowing that Tesla had that reliable supercharger network, and I had heard good things about it and good things about ownership from everybody that had a Tesla, that's really what I ended up with. Definitely ended up spending more on a car than I ever thought I would, but I'm seriously so happy with it. I think it fits my lifestyle just fine. It's most of the time just me and my fiance in the car. Sometimes we have like 1 or 2 passengers, but like I don't haul things around. It's a good sized car for me. I like having a smaller car too. I knew I was looking at more of kind of a sedan / coupe, so wanted something a little more sporty. And that's what worked out for me. So
awesome.
So what kind of things were you considering when you were shopping around for an EV?
Yeah, so when I was shopping around for an EV, the biggest thing for me was something that was affordable. I was laid off in 2019, and I was unemployed for about, I think it was either 6 or 7 months. So, so it was a very long time, and we ended up getting our Bolt in September of 2019. So that was like, actually, what was funny is that I got the car 2 days before I was starting my new job. So it's like I technically wasn't even employed when we bought the car.
Yeah.
But for me, the biggest thing was cost. I wanted to make sure that going into my new job that I could afford and still be able to save money. And it all worked out. The biggest thing is that I've always been a massive fan of hatchbacks. I've always loved hatchbacks, and the Bolt's body style, even though it's not the prettiest in terms of like aesthetics, I still love the fact that it was a hatchback and that like it was practical for what we needed it to be. Good with the dogs, good for just getting around town for my commute. And I needed something with more than 200 miles of range because I had a 50-mile round trip commute. Yeah. So for me, that was pretty much my biggest purchasing factor. But I also wanted something that was fun to drive, and I think the Bolt offered that.
Definitely.
I think the most surprising thing was squealing the tires at red lights or like green lights and like scaring people. Yeah, just because of how much torque was in that car. But that was the biggest deciding factor with the Bolt, is the body style as well as the cost factor.
Gotcha.
Over the past 2 years, yes, I think that, especially now with like some of the lease deals that GM offers on the Bolt, I wish I would have held out just a little bit longer, just because you can get some pretty good deals. But in terms of the ID4, that was a little bit of a different process. That was more of a Tyler purchase than it was mine. I definitely enjoyed the car after like recording with it and like, getting a chance to experience it. But I mean, like Tyler had a list, I think at one point, of 40 cars.
Oh,
I mean,
my
like
goodness.
Yeah, like he had an Excel spreadsheet. Like he weighed out all the purchasing reasons, like, what this car would be good at, what this one would be at. And he kept like going back and forth. I mean, like it was like 3 months of like, just, come on, make up your mind.
Was that all EVs, or was that a mix of EVs and gas?
It was a mix. There were some hybrids. There was a brand new Miata that was involved with that. The ID4 kind of always was at the top. We were thinking of the Mach-E, but then the lease payment was too expensive.
Gotcha.
So I was actually going to surprise Tyler with the ID4. I'm impatient. And I was kind of getting like, kind of like a little frustrated with like the waiting, like, come on, our lease is coming up. Like, let's figure out what to do. So we had the money saved up, and I was going to literally just go pick up the car, make his decision for him, and then show up at the racetrack he was at with the ID4. So like, surprise. But I'm terrible with surprises, so we just ended up buying it together.
It's probably for the best.
Yeah. But I know that he wanted an SUV. He wanted something that was a little bit more of a wagon, but he wanted a German vehicle because he's always been like a Volkswagen fanatic.
Gotcha.
So this kind of like checked all the boxes for him, and kind of worked out for the best.
Yeah. ID4 is an awesome car. I got to drive it at the test drive event in Columbus here, and then I got to ride it obviously when I came up and visited you, and it's like, I tell people it's probably one of the most comfortable EVs I've been in, just like overall. It's so smooth, like the turning and everything. It's just such a comfortable ride. Like, it'd be an awesome like Uber car.
Right? Yeah, I
like that would be,
I agree. Yeah. The best way I describe the ID4 is that it's a Volkswagen build quality, just electric. And like I think it's honestly one of the best priced EVs in its category.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's really affordable right now too.
Oh, yeah. Alex, obviously, we talked about how we found our electric vehicles, like what interested us and how like the buying process is, or what it was like. What piece of advice or like what kind of information would you like to give the listener, like when they're looking for an electric vehicle?
Definitely. Yeah, I think probably the two most important are, first off, set your budget. Cars are like some of the worst like financial decisions you can make. If you like stretch yourself for a car, it's like not good financially. So definitely like get a grasp on that and understand like what your budget is going to be and how important your car is to you as well. So like,
yes,
I know my car is very important to me. It's part of my lifestyle. It's part of my work now. Like it's part of everything I do. So I enjoy having a nicer, longer range EV. But that doesn't mean everybody has to spend $50,000 on a car. So I think that's certainly the first thing to consider. But then charging as well. So I know for me that was a little bit tougher decision because I didn't have charging at home. Obviously, charging at home is the easiest thing to do, but not everybody has that option. Either you rent an apartment or you own a condo or something that won't let you install a charger, or maybe your house is like parked on the street and you don't have like a good driveway situation, or whatever the reason may be. Understanding what your charging is going to look like, I think, factors into whether or not you go with an EV in the first place too. Certainly, like, our infrastructure has gotten way better. There's way more options for people now, and I like definitely foresee there being an option for charging for everybody in the future. But currently, I think it's good to like check out some of these charging apps that'll show you where chargers are located, like Chargeway or PlugShare, any of those kind of apps, and see what the charging situation is around you and kind of get a grasp on that. So, but outside of price and charging, I think range is a big thing to consider as well. Like you mentioned with your Bolt, like, you wanted 200 miles because you had a 50-mile trip to work every day. So, did you get to 200 miles just so you had like a little bit of a buffer there with that 50-mile trip to work?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking at. Like, I looked at the Nissan Leaf, and another thing too that I think people should understand is what kind of technology is wrapped into their vehicles, specifically the battery pack, in terms of like battery management system or systems. That's kind of the reason why I skipped the Leaf over the Bolt. Because the Leaf is air cooled and the Bolt has a liquid, cooled battery pack.
Yeah.
So for me, with being in Cleveland and colder temperatures, I wanted to make sure that I got the most out of my EV. And that's, I mean, like, obviously, if you have a shorter commute, the Leaf would be perfect for you. But for me, I needed that buffer.
Definitely.
Yeah,
and I think with the Leaf too, like, that's one I recommend if you just want like a second car for doing trips around town. I think we've mentioned it in past episodes, but like, I think really taking a closer look at what your driving habits are like, and I think you'd be surprised like how often an EV would actually work for you.
Oh,
because
yeah.
most of the trips you take are just around town or to work. Like you may only really need a 100-mile EV, and then maybe you've got a gas car that you take on longer trips that's a little bit bigger. Like there's certainly like lots of flexibility with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know that especially if you have like workplace charging, that if you have a longer commute, actually one of our friends, I think he has like a 70 plus one way commute.
Wow.
And he drives a hybrid right now, and he's nervous about going electric. But the thing is that he works at a hospital downtown Cleveland that has charging stations in every parking garage.
Wow.
And
okay.
His reason for not going electric is because he feels like the doctors will take the space. And I just was like, okay, that's not an argument, because there's chargers available, just find one. Like, don't be afraid of it for that reason.
Certainly.
But
yeah.
but the thing is that like if you have the workplace charging, you could just charge during the day, get back home, charge at night, and then just repeat that cycle throughout the week.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that factored into my decision on range, because I was obviously I've got to I work from home now, so I don't even hardly drive my car, but I I had a very short commute to work. But a lot of the trips I took, like outside of work trips, were driving to see family that isn't close. So like my parents live over in Indianapolis, and that's a 200-mile one-way trip. So I basically wanted to be able to drive from Columbus to Indianapolis without stopping if necessary. Most of the time driving over there, I stop anyway, just because I need a little bit of a break, and there's a charger halfway, so it works out really well. But if for some reason like there's an emergency or I need to get over there quickly, having my car sitting at 90% plus, like I can just get over there just fine without stopping. So, and then like you were saying, factoring in like some losses if like weather or in the environment isn't very good and you're driving less efficiently, like having that extra range buffer certainly helps. So,
and I think that comes into another research point when you are looking for a new EV, kind of factor in your environment. If you live in a warmer environment, you won't really necessarily have to worry about as much loss of range due to exterior impacts. But here in Cleveland, as well as, sometimes, just in general during the winter time up north, we have to think about that, and we have to put that factor into how much it will impact our range. But that also plays into body style too. There's boxy electric SUVs coming. There's, very off-road capable cars that would be fantastic in the winter time. Like, there's a lot of new EVs that I think will fit every customer's needs.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah, efficiency is, I think, a big thing to consider as well, because we don't get like an MPG rating for EVs, so it's kind of harder to figure out like the efficiency of EVs, which I really wish they would list like the equivalent for electric vehicles. Instead of miles per gallon, it would be like miles per kilowatt hour. So that if they listed that for each car, you could see a clear like distinction, like, oh, this one's like 3.8 miles per kilowatt hour. This one's 2.5 miles per kilowatt hour. So then that shows you like how efficient those cars are based on the battery pack size and like how much range they have. So I think you can calculate it, but I wish that was a like spec they showed on a lot of these cars, because they generally just show range.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I agree. I know that the Bolt and the ID4 does show it miles per kilowatt hour, like on
nice.
Like
okay.
So
on like the cluster.
Nice. Yeah, I know the Bolt is rated at 3.9 miles per kilowatt hour, like optimal driving.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I actually just saw someone with a Mach-E they've been averaging, I think, 4.2 miles per kilowatt hour.
Jeez. Okay.
Yeah. And the ID4 is floating around that point too. So
yeah, over 4, I think is really good. Like that's like, obviously it's not a direct comparison, but that'd be like a 40 or 50 mile per gallon car. I kind of feel like equivalent in the EV space, whereas like under that or lower than that is probably like more your 25 or 30 mile per gallon. So I wish they would give that spec. That's kind of a harder thing to like look into, but if you can find like the mileage, generally you can kind of tell based on how many miles of range the car has too, is how efficient it is, because there's only so many batteries you can stick into the car just based on the size of it sometimes. So
I think another thing too that would be good to consider is performance. If you are looking for an electric vehicle that has high performance specs, like say for example, if you enjoy, like if you have a hobby of like motorsports or something of that nature, or maybe you even just like to drive to Costco, pretty fast. I think it's a good idea to keep in mind, do you want an electric vehicle that does 0 to 60 under 2 seconds? Or would you be okay with something at like 5 seconds? Because even then that's pretty fast. But the good news is that most EVs will do it well under 9 seconds.
Which is insane. Yeah. I always have people ask me, like, is it worth upgrading to a performance Model 3? And generally, like, my recommendation is no, because unless you're like somebody that really craves performance, you're going to pay like, I think it's like $8,000 more or something like that to get the performance Model 3. You lose a little bit of range just because it's tuned more for performance than like long distance. So generally, I like don't really recommend buying a like higher performance car unless that's really what you're into and what you want to spend your money on. Like definitely not going to like knock you for it, but I think it's important to kind of take that into consideration as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think of like basic points too. Like I'm trying to we did not talk about charging rate, and I think that's a huge one that goes overlooked so much. Charging? Oh, like kilowatts?
Yeah, like max kilowatt charging rates, because I know that's a big quip with like your car with the Bolt. Fast charging is like really slow. It's capped at 50. Like the ID, like you've noticed it already with the ID4, you plug in and it's like a 20-minute stop versus a 40-minute stop. So I think that'd be a good thing to touch on. You have like real world experience with that too.
Yeah. So actually, let me think of how to lead into this. So another really important point when you're researching buying an electric vehicle is understanding the charging rate. All electric vehicles have varying different charging rates when it comes to DC fast charging. They rate anywhere from under 50 kilowatts to over 250 kilowatts. We're starting to see some electric vehicles get well over 250. So it's a varying spectrum of charging rates.
Yeah, which is very confusing for consumers, right? Because we're not used to thinking about that stuff. It's just like, oh, we can fill up just as fast in this car versus that car. So
exactly, and that's where Chargeway would come in. You know, with the color number, different levels, with pretty much helping people understand on a more easier basis of how charging works. But the easiest way to think of like charging rates is the lower the number, the slower the vehicle will charge. Yeah. So, for example, the Bolt EV is rated or technically capped at 50 kilowatts, which I have personal experience with. Yeah. That is very slow compared to today's standards. In fact, the new Bolts, to be honest, don't even compete with other vehicles in that price category because of the slower charging rate. But our ID4 is rated at 125 kilowatts, which is almost 2.5 times faster than our Bolt. And you notice a massive difference. But that is nothing compared to what Alex's Model 3 can do.
So that was another part that I considered when I was shopping around, is because I realized when I was looking at the Bolt, when I was looking at like the Clarity, some of these other cars, their charging rates were capped at 50 kilowatts. Which probably means nothing to you if you're not an electric vehicle owner. But essentially it's
number 4 on Chargeway.
Number 4 on Chargeway, yeah. So it's slow for a fast charger. Even though it's called a fast charger, it's still a slow charge in my opinion. So my car can go up to 250 kilowatts. What's the Chargeway conversion there? 250.
That's a number 7.
Number 7. Okay. So mine can do up to
the top
level 7.
Of all the levels.
Yeah. So mine can do up to a level 7 or a number 7, and that is crazy fast. Like just looking at the numbers, 250 versus 50 kilowatts. Like it's 5 times as much. So just understanding that when I was shopping for an EV was really important. I think if you're shopping around, I think I would recommend something that can handle at least 100 kilowatts, if not 150 kilowatts, I think is generally what I recommend to people. the ID4 splits the difference at 125, has like really, really fast charging speeds. So, I mean, most superchargers when I bought my car capped out at 150. So that's generally what I'm charging at, but I don't stop for more than a half hour. Like if I'm on the road, that almost never happens where I have to sit there for 45 minutes. So that's kind of what I would recommend, is make sure you get something above 100, even 150 if you can, because that's really going to be the new standard in fast charging, I think, is 150 kilowatts.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's, like you said, there's vehicles that can handle 250, 350. Like we're going to start ramping up here where vehicles can handle that high charging rates. But for what's available right now and the chargers on the market as well, 150 is going to be, you're going to be topping out most everywhere.
Yeah. That was actually another thing I wanted to bring up. I think that this would actually be a perfect Chargeway discussion. Talking about the understanding like the different standards with the vehicles, and like talking about like how all the chargers out there are going to vary in that power output.
Yeah.
Do you mind if I talk about that?
Yeah. The next point I was going to make, and if you want to make it too, is that the charge rate can be limited by the charger itself too. So understanding like what your vehicle can take and what the charger can output, because it's going to be the minimum between those two. So if you're at if you're at a 150 kilowatt charger, you're only going to be able to pull 50 if you're driving a Bolt or a Nissan Leaf. Like, understanding that is very important. So yeah, you'll probably say the same thing, but go for it.
Well, I mean, actually, I think the way you just said it was a good way to say it. One thing that I want to mention that I think it's really important for people who are looking to get into an electric vehicle, especially if they are new with electric cars, is understanding the charging standard that each vehicle has. So to talk from the Chargeway perspective, a Tesla has a red standard, or they have a Tesla standard. Our Bolt and the ID4 has a green standard, or what the engineering or technical term would be a CCS port. And then the Nissan Leaf has a blue category, which would be a CHAdeMO charger, which is another standard. And now, as EV enthusiasts, we know for people who are starting to get into electric cars, a lot of that information can be confusing, and you may wonder which vehicles have which. And this is actually where my new employer, which I don't actually think I've announced this on one of our podcasts yet, Chargeway, comes into play. So Chargeway is a mobile application and a new mindset, really helping people understand what it's like to fuel their vehicles with electric fuel. And each of those charging standards, as I mentioned before, is matched with a color and a number. And basically, the number reflects what your vehicle is capable of charging at in terms of max power input. Maybe power acceptance. I'm not exactly sure how to say that, but so basically that's where your car would fit into the mobile app. So one thing that we want to let everybody know is that when you're out in the wild and you're at a DC fast charger, every charger is going to vary on power output. We are starting to see a standard where there is kind of like a leveling out of charging stations where they're hitting kind of like a base level of power output. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you're driving a Chevy Bolt with 50 kilowatts of power, or with a accepted charge rate, and you're charging at, say, like 150 kilowatt hour station, that doesn't mean your car can charge at that power level.
Yeah.
it can only charge
by the car.
Yes, exactly. So that's where, if you haven't yet, I would definitely recommend downloading Chargeway and just experiencing what the app has to offer, because it really helps you understand where your limits are with your specific vehicle, and it will show you chargers based on that specific limit. So it really makes things easier. And,
that's a good way to no, that's good. That'd be a good thing for people to download, and if they are shopping for cars and you're considering 3 or 4, pop them all in. You can add multiple vehicles in there, pop them all in there, and so you can see like what the max charge rates are for them. So it kind of makes the research part easy if you just use the Chargeway app.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. And as I mentioned, I just started working with Chargeway, so if you have any questions, let us know.
Definitely. Any other final recommendations or things you think like potential EV buyers should be looking at if they're shopping for a new car?
I would say just be prepared as much as possible, kind of before. I would say in terms of like any purchase, especially when it comes to a vehicle, just understand how this fits into your life, how it benefits you as the owner versus, vice versa. And just really understand exactly what you're looking for. Do your research, ask your questions, and just be prepared as much as possible.
Definitely. Yeah. It's kind of a blessing and a curse being in the age we live in, because information is everywhere, and you can research any product and watch YouTube videos on it and soak up as much information as you can. And like we mentioned earlier, like you can oftentimes be more educated than the salesperson if you're zeroed in on a specific car. I actually heard an interesting like tidbit the other day. I guess I don't know what study or stat this was from, but the average consumer watches at least one video before they purchase a new car. Did you know that? Yeah.
No.
Well, I mean, if you look at all car buyers, I mean, not everybody's like watching YouTube all day like we do. So,
yeah, that's true.
But just the fact that people are searching for videos before they buy a car, like like you probably wouldn't have said that 10 years ago. Like, I think that's pretty cool. And there's videos on all these cars out there if you are researching them and want to hear an owner's perspective. I know that's something we try to do on our channels a lot, is really share the ownership side of things versus just like, look at this cool thing my car can do. Like, so.
The truth behind everything, right? Yeah.
So that'd be my recommendation is go watch a video, one of our videos maybe.
Yeah, right. Links in the notes below. No?
Definitely. I will say I just did my most recent video is just an overview of charging. So if you are like new to EVs or just starting to shop for them and want to understand the different power levels Jeez. So if you are new to EVs and you want to understand the power levels of charging, the different connector types, like what different vehicles have, the charging rates, all that kind of stuff, and like also the charge times along with that, I shared like what my car generally charges at different like charging levels. I shared all that in my most recent video, so definitely recommend you guys check that out.
And our ID4 had kind of a cameo.
That's right. Yeah.
In a lot of that video.
Definitely.
It's a good video.
Yours has the CCS connector, so I had to, or the green connector, so I had to steal that one for some B-roll.
Well, I'd rather have the ID4 in your video than the Bolt. So, just being honest. So, Alex, I actually have another dealership story for you.
Oh yeah, what's that?
So my friend is always complaining about the Swedish car dealership he works at. Today I had enough and finally I said, I don't want to hear any more of your sob stories.
Is that right?
I can't take credit for that. The joke was way too good.
All right.
Oh, I should say my Volkswagen. No, just kidding.
All right. So obviously, we're here to support you all as well. If you are shopping for a car and want to reach out to us and kind of get our thoughts on certain vehicles, I know I answer a lot of messages from subscribers if you DM us and ask for tidbits or pointers or whatever else. If you are shopping for a car, we're definitely open to that. So you can DM either of us or our social accounts for Living Electric. We're on Twitter at Living Electric _, Instagram Living Electric Podcast, Facebook Living Electric Podcast, and they should all be linked now in the show notes. I think I updated that as well, so you can just click the link down there instead of trying to hunt for us. So
awesome.
Yeah, so that'll do it for this episode. Definitely reach out if you're shopping for a car or just bought an EV as well. We'd love to hear your stories, and we'll talk to you in the next episode.